Vile had succeeded in opening his portal to his original world, but supercharging the portal device with the Ice God power had unforeseen consequences. It bent the fabric of reality, warping space and time, and giving rise to hundreds more portals with gateways into other worlds. Ava and the captain stared in disbelief as curious beings from distant dimensions emerged from the portals. Both the bulls and the apes were powerless to do anything about it and could only watch as innumerable beings of all kinds set foot onto the methane fields. The entire world was hung in suspended breath, waiting to see what would happen. Would they have to fight to save their home? Many bulls and apes readied themselves, but no attack came. Then came a rumbling from the earth, and the sky twisted and warped in a swift and bewildering siphoning of energy. The gateways vanished into thin air, disappearing as quickly as they had arrived. The beings who had entered turned back in shock and tried to run back from where they had come, but there was nowhere to return to. Ava and the captain ran up to where Vile had just been moments ago and found the portal device singed and shattered on the ground. The Ice God's power had been too much to contain, and opening so many portals at once had caused the portal device to explode. Vile was gone, but the sudden closure left the beings from the many weird worlds marooned on the bulls and apes planet. They were trapped in this foreign world, and panic soon erupted. But the God Bulls swung into action. Accustomed to dealing with their own internal matters, they descended upon the methane fields in an attempt to organize the chaos. Speaking out with deep, authoritative voices, they called everyone to order. The strange beings that had arrived stared up at the God Bulls in awe and fell into line as the God Bulls addressed them. The God Bulls promised to provide shelter and supplies as long as required, then promised they would not rest until everyone was returned to their homeworlds. This calmed the panic, and slowly, one race of beings at a time, the apes worked with the bulls to welcome each visitor into their city. It was during this process, and amongst the assortment of civilizations that had descended, that the bulls found one group that stood out. A striking chord of recognition was felt within the bulls as they laid their eyes on this particular group of newcomers. They realized that they were bulls just like them, known amongst themselves as the bulls on the block. They were strangely familiar, and it was as though an intangible connection linked their past. When the bulls interacted with the bulls on the block, they felt a spark running down through their very genetics. They knew at once that they were kindred beings. Prompted by this inexplicable connection, the scientific community of bulls embarked on a journey of inquiry. Quick tests were conducted to explore the depths of this unexpected bond. As the results were unveiled, a startling revelation came to light. An intricate genetic code that was common to both species was uncovered. They had similar origin DNA. But that wasn't all. The God Bulls suspected that because of their similarities, that the Creator had something to do with this brother race. They summoned S1 to assemble a group of engineers and scientists from both the bulls and apes and directed him to embark on an expedition to investigate the internal data of the Creator's ship. The ship was still abandoned on the planet, and with the brightest minds in tow, S1 led them to it. Their technology had improved considerably since the ship's initial discovery, and with the shared knowledge of the apes, the bulls did a complete data decryption, running programs and algorithms to decode the system files. It was during this investigation that the bulls and apes found a hidden folder. Contained within it was a single video. It flickered to life on the holographic projector within the Creator's ship, and the bulls and apes were in awe as they caught a glimpse into the past. 200 years ago, the Creator emerged from his ship on a brand new and unfamiliar world. He was disappointed by the failures of his last creations and was committed to pouring his full power into a race of new beings. Using powers that far surpassed many of his fellow humans, the Creator began materializing elements of life itself, rearranging them into building blocks and creating a unique genetic code. Trillions of permutations and possible combinations flashed by until suddenly the Creator froze. A DNA helix spun before his eyes, and he pulled it forward towards him in awe of the potential it held. He began to make quick tweaks and alterations with twists of his hands, removing genetic code in some places while changing and adding it in others. Days went by, and when it was done, the creator gazed out on his first creation of bulls. He was so happy with his success that he was inspired to evolve the bull's DNA into a modified bull creation, and then created a companion race of bears. The primal blueprints had been laid. Now he observed his newly formed society from afar, subtly influencing them until he was witnessing an incredible and boisterous civilization flourishing before him. He was so immersed with observing them that he did not notice the threat that loomed just beyond the planetary horizon. It came out of nowhere, a flash of red before the sky lit up with fire. Meteorites engulfed in flames rained from the sky, and the creator stared up in shock. When the first impact hit, it shook the entire planet, and it was only at that moment that the creator knew that all of his creations would be destroyed if he did not help them. He jumped into his ship and rushed to their aid, but their world was in chaos. Their main city had been obliterated, and their civilization scattered to all corners of the planet. The creator wanted to save as many as he could, but the landscape was devastated, with bodies of his creations scattered everywhere. The creator himself was nearly hit, and only just narrowly avoided death. He pulled up and zipped away from the planet, forced to leave his pride and joy behind. He knew just how brutal the cosmos could be, and he left thinking that none of his beautiful bulls and bears on the block had survived. The video flickered off, and S1 stared in awe at the empty space. He had witnessed their creator at work. But not only that, the bulls on the block were born of the same hand and of near identical genetics. Subject 1 and the scientist rushed back to report back to the god bulls in the bull cities. They explained in detail the history of bulls on the block, revealing the earliest threads of the creator's early creation. These bulls were not just random wanderers from a distant dimension. They were survivors of the creator's initial endeavor to sculpt a society of bulls. The bulls on the block were a flashback. The creator's hidden files unveiled them as the blueprint for the bulls, the very reason they existed. As the bulls and apes grappled with the newfound confluence of their worlds, they realized that destiny had woven their paths together in ways more profound than they could ever have fathomed. It was a drastic revelation, and one that took them completely by surprise amidst the frenzy of all the other guests. It was like a long-lost reunion, and the bulls on the block were offered a permanent place amongst them. Even though the bulls on the block were offered a new home, the bulls and apes could not offer that to the rest of the beings. As the days passed, it became evident that there was no possibility of hosting and caring for so many beings. Scientists quickly calculated that this sheer amount of demand would diminish their methane resources in a matter of months. They had to figure out a way to get all these beings back to their original worlds. This many beings was not sustainable in the bulls and apes world, and they were at risk of extinction. While the bulls and apes were preoccupied with all of the new beings that were stranded on their world, a spy named Dolian, who was loyal to Vile, broke into Ava and Captain's home and stole Ava's communication device. Using skills he learned while watching the bulls, he reprogrammed it to communicate with his home planet in hopes that Vile had survived. Unbeknownst to the bulls and the allied apes, Vile had survived the blast and been knocked into one of the portals that opened. He growled as he stood upon the barren wasteland of his desolate planet and reached for his interdimensional communication device, pinging for his legion of ape followers. It was Dolian who answered, and Vile barked his orders to scour the bull cities and to find any apes that were loyal to him. As Dolian found those that were loyal, he gave them each a hooded robe, so they would all know who was supportive of Vile when the time came to take this new world. As Dolian communicated the current state of affairs in the bull cities, Vile smiled, for he knew that the bulls would not have enough methane to support such a large quantity of beings, and their supply had already dwindled due to Vile's war. This much was true. The bulls and allied apes knew that they had to protect their methane and develop a way to restore function to the portal device once more. Ava and the god bulls directed the bull and ape scientists to begin to try and figure out a way to repair the portal device. The bulls and apes had learned to work together in the time that they lived together. The Allied apes helped to rebuild the devastated northern city, and they learned that if they teamed up with the bulls in the methane harvesting, they could double their production. This was great for all of the rebuilding efforts, but it was nowhere near enough to compensate for the influx in beings, many of whom were primitive and had never seen such technology before. In an attempt to generate the energy needed to support all of these beings, the bulls taught their visitors how to mine the methane. This was effective, but the bulls knew it was not sustainable, as the methane would soon be depleted to a point where the bulls, allied apes, and now bulls on the block would not have the methane needed to sustain themselves. The days passed, and resources were depleting at an alarming rate, threatening everyone's very survival. And amid their scramble to devise solutions, an evil was growing unbeknownst to them. In a distant canyon, Vile supporters were mining into the rock face, gathering methane resources of their own and amassing a large contingent of spies. Dolian had devised a way for him and his fellow spies to sneak in and out of the cities. Security was on high alert due to all of the new species, and they had been restricted to specific zones within each of the 4 cities. But being an ape, he was granted certain privileges. Using his freedom of movement through the cities, he learned that all the scientists were hard at work on something, the details of which were still not clear. Dolian observed the security and watched for several days until he learned their routine and schedules. Slipping into the bull's laboratory, he stole a lab coat to use as a disguise and spy on the scientists. It was there that he saw Vile's broken portal device. Some of the inner mechanisms were still intact, and the scientists were using those small pieces to try and uncover a way to reverse engineer it. But it was obvious that the bulls were still very far away from a viable device. He left without being seen, and in a dark alley informed Vile of the bulls' plans. To his surprise, Vile was pleased. If the bulls and traitorous apes were trying to fix or develop a new portal device, then that gave him the perfect opportunity to return to their world. He ordered Dolian to continue to monitor the progress and directed him to steal the portal device when it was operational and create an opening for him to return. But that was not all Vile had in mind. He was going to return and do what he originally planned to do: conquer this new world. He was amassing a new army and would return with a power stronger than any had ever seen, a power only matched by the Creator.